Morning. Chapter 38 of the book of Genesis. Again, Genesis means what? The beginning. So we're getting pretty deep in the beginning, ain't we? We saw a lot of wonderful things. We saw some hard judgments against, would be the word, when God destroyed the world by water. I don't know how much time you spent thinking about the flood, or if you have it all, but can you imagine how that it grieves the heart of God to do that? I've seen some preachers and I've seen some people believe the opinion that God delights in punishing people or seeing people die and go to hell. And that is absolutely not the truth at all. But as we get into today's lesson, it talks about Judah. Judah means praise. And I think about that, his name and what it means. And I know the story of his life that we see here today. And it's a good example that regardless of where you've been, God will still use you. Amen? Because we know that Christ came from the lineage of who? Out of the tribe of Judah. Sometimes we quickly pass judgment upon people and write them off because of maybe a mistake or a sin, whatever it is that you would want to call it, that they've committed. And if that would be the case, that we did that all the time, Judah would be one of the people that you would write off. Let's get into the lesson today. Someone, if you would, start reading down through verse 5. Nobody wants to read all them names? These are not hard names. They're short.
Brethren, and turned into a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. And Judah saw there was a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. And he took her and went into it. And she conceived and bare a son, and he called his name Er. And she conceived again and bare a son, and she called his name Onan. And she yet again conceived and bare a son, and called his name Shelah. And he went at Shezib, which he bare him.
All we have, there's not a lot just to notice. He married a Canaanite, which is an idolatrous people or worships false gods. So when you intermingle with the world, guess what's going to happen? They're going to lead you astray. I know of very few instances in life that a Christian girl marries, or a Christian boy, either way, marries a non-Christian, that they end up winning the other one to the Lord. Most of the time, it's the other way. Matter of fact, not only just in marriage, it happens in just the dating end of it as well. There are some instances that people will stay true to God, and they end up they end up splitting up. But I've seen too many of them. It's one thing I drilled into my daughters: you don't date somebody that is not a Christian. If you do, you don't get very serious about it. You might date them once or twice, but if they're going to hang around, you better make sure they're a child of God, because if not, they'll have you doing things. I don't care who you are. they'll have you doing things that you don't want to be doing because of their worldly thinking, right? So he marries this Canaanite woman. Notice that these three sons are mentioned just bam, bam, bam. Now I know and you know it takes 10 months for a child to be born from the time of conception. It takes 40 weeks. That's 10 months. We call it 9 months of pregnancy, but it's actually 40 weeks, which is right at 10 months. But as you look at this, these three sons, it really doesn't give us a lot of times when the Bible gives names, there's a certain meaning to it. And here, notice there's none of it that's mentioned. But we jump from verse 5 to verse 6, and I'm going to read it real fast. And Judah took a wife for Er, his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. Notice how much time that you jump from verse 4, when Er is born. Verse 3, at the end of verse 3. From verse 3 to verse 6, this boy is old enough to get married. Old enough to support a family. So as we think about that, we have to, again, realize that there's a lot that's went on behind the scenes that we have no idea about. And the Bible doesn't give us the history that's went on. But we can tell this, that instead of, I guess the best way to say it is the family of Jacob is intermingling with those that are around them. They're just blending in. Is that ever a good thing? Why?
Well, one thing, if they're not a Christian person, you become what they are.
When you...
It's like kids that run around with, they may not drink and they may not smoke, and they run around kids who eventually, normally, you give in to what
they'll either get away from them or they'll blend right in or they'll join right in. I think about the scripture, it said, can a leopard change his spots? And a chameleon can. They can change colors. They can blend into their surroundings. We are not called to blend in. We're called to be peculiar. To be that's strange or to stand out. How? Here's what the scripture said. Let your light so shine before men. Why would the scripture say, let your light so shine before men? Because the world is dark. Now I realize we look outside, the sun's shining, there's a beautiful blue sky out there. It's not dark, naturally speaking, but it's spiritually speaking, this world is dark. And I realize that, or we have to realize that these boys, remember for a long time, there was idols in the house. It hasn't been very long ago, about 2 chapters ago, if my memory serves me correct, that God appeared to Jacob and said, listen, I am the God of Bethel. Put away your strange gods. And that's what Jacob told the house. He buried him under the oak tree 2 or 3 chapters ago, not very far. So and I realize that even though probably 25 years have passed, remember this. None of them people converted. They didn't have what you and I have as Christians on the inside. Anyone that is a churchgoer is apt to walk in sin. But a child of God that is a Christian, now I'm not saying that we don't sin, all right? But we won't live therein. If we do, we're not His. Because, if we don't keep the commandments or the laws of God, then Scripture, or Jesus said, you are none of mine, you're none of His. So if we do them, we are. But our light is to shine in a dark world. Now again, let your light so shine before men that, anybody finish that verse for me? And there's an and behind that. To see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. So our lives are not to point out ourselves. Our lives are to point out God and how that we can be different. We don't have to go with the flow. Amen? All right. An error, is that how you would say that? Well, when I think of that word, think of I'm like, he's a mistake. Or if you're a pirate, well, you could say R. Right? And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. Notice that? He was wicked in the eyes of the Lord. Why do you think that he was? They ain't going to church, all right? They're not worshiping. His father never taught him to worship God. Now, why would Judah be that way? Why would Judah not teach his son to worship God? Because again, Judah's been taught there are many gods. Remember who his mother was? His mother is Leah. Remember where they came from. Again, and here comes Rachel carrying out all the gods of Laban, his grandfather, and they're out there, and they've just cleaned house. These boys are grown when they clean house. They're grown men. When you get to be a grown man, but the odds of getting saved, now it's not impossible, but they greatly decrease. The older you get, the less likely you are to serve God. I mean, the odds of someone that's 70 years old coming to know Christ is horrendous. Like 1 in a trillion. Because their hearts are hard. They've saw so much. He never taught them to pray. Evidently, I'm just saying. And they've just blended into their surroundings now. They've settled down. They're not wandering from place to place to place. They're settling here in the land of Canaan, which is the land that God gave them to settle in. All right? That's the land. That's part of the land that God gave Abraham.
But wasn't they supposed to destroy them people at the time? Or am I ahead of myself?
You're way ahead. They're out to destroy them until Joshua and all those people come back in. That's what caused the problem today. They didn't do what God said then. And they're still reaping. All right? So, and the Lord slew him. Again, it wasn't because that God slew him to make God happy. I'm telling you, sin can only go so far without it being punished.
He must have been very, very wicked.
He had to be very, very wicked. I mean, it don't tell us what he did. All it tells us is he was wicked, very sinful. Could have been part of it. Could have been he was very rebellious toward his father. I mean, I know the Bible said if you honor your father and your mother, that your days will be long upon this earth. But if it says that if you honor them, imagine what it says if you dishonor them.
It's a good thing a lot of people today live in the dispensation of grace.
We don't know whether he was living a homosexual lifestyle, whether he was married or just being continually drunk with wild women and just, we don't know. It doesn't go into detail. Why doesn't it go into detail? Because there's nothing he did for God that's important. Remember that. I realize that this fellow will face his record at the great white throne judgment. I believe that. All right? He's probably in hell right now. I mean, not probably. He's in hell right now, reserved until the day of judgment, the great white throne. He will give an answer for every work that he did then. Imagine what he's went through for the last 3,000 years. Think about that. So wicked that God killed him and he's been in hell for 3,000 years. Preacher, how do you know he went to hell? Well, he was wicked. Just honestly, if he had looked ahead toward Christ. Now I realize later on Judah changes. All right? We have to understand that. All right, verse 7. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. And Judah said unto Onan, Go in to thy brother's wife and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. Why in the world would he say that? That was the custom. And here's the thing. Who wants to raise somebody else's kid?
But back then, that meant something.
But here's the thing. Honestly, it wouldn't have been Er's kid. It'd been Onan's kid. But he would inherit whatever was to inherit. I never have figured that out. It doesn't make any sense to me why that this would go on anywhere. Notice, let's go on in the next verse. And Onan knew that his seed should not be his, and it came to pass that when he went into his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. Notice the next thing. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore the Lord slew him also. So this is what he said. He said, I'm going to make it look like I did, but nobody will know I didn't do it. He was disobedient, dishonoring the Lord and what he was supposed to do. Again, I don't understand this. They never have, never will. But what can we say about Onan? I mean, I realize it talks about the wickedness of but what can we say about Onan? He was no better. But he also was selfish. Now, we know in the book of Ruth that Boaz is a near kinsman, and he takes Ruth to his wife, and they have a son whose name is Obed. Remember that? But really, I realize that Boaz and Ruth are the father, but who was this son's inheritance came from? It would have been either Naomi's husband or Naomi's son. Remember, he was to go in and take her to wife to raise up seed to the dead, that they don't lose their inheritance. Well, how many knows that when you die, you leave it all behind? You've done lost it all, right? I mean, if we go dig up John Rockefeller, wherever he's buried at, all we think we would find probably by now, as long as he's been dead, is a bunch of dust. There ain't no money buried there with John Rockefeller. Ain't no possessions. Or, I think of all the pharaohs that was buried in all these big elaborate tombs and these pyramids, and all the wealth that was buried with them. You know what happened to that? Somebody found it. It's either in a museum or in somebody's collection somewhere today, because they may have died. They buried their servants with them.
It's hard to imagine that. I mean, when he died, you did too.
Your life was over, wasn't it? Can you imagine the miserable existence that these people had that would be sealed up inside of that? You know, they did bury them with such things as they would need. I mean, they have still found grain and all this stuff that was inside there that was kept preserved because of all that. And I realize that's way off from where we are here, but to take how men think and how they perceive death and the afterlife. If people really honestly in their heart of hearts thought about going to a lake of fire forever, how many lost people do you think they would be? My wife made an observation just right out the road right here, just past Larry and Dorothy's house on the other side, now before we got to yours. And she said, it's amazing how many people don't go to church anymore. And I said, you know, I said, used to be that would be the opposite. It'd be amazing how many people went to church. If we would go back to, let's say, the 50s and the 60s, in the old little white church over here, and you drove up and down this road, you know what you'd see? You'd see people walking down that road to church. Now we have air-conditioned cars that ride us real smooth up and down the road, and they're home in their easy chairs or in their bed or watching television, or they're down at the lake, or or cutting grass. You know, 50 years ago, how many people would you see cutting grass on Sunday? What did you think about someone when you if you drove by and you saw?
I always felt guilty.
Huh?
I always felt guilty. Back when I worked 6 days and I worked until 10:30. And every time I had at church, I'd mow. And I felt guilty then, but that was the only time I had was Sunday, because I worked until it was 10:30 every day.
My dad would not allow us to mow on Sunday. You mowed it on Saturday or you mowed it on Monday. It's just.
We was talking yesterday, stores, gas stations, nothing was ever open.
I remember when Walmart was closed for Easter. You remember that? They don't close for anything hardly anymore. Don't they open up like at 6 o'clock that evening? I think they open back up like 6 o'clock. Well, it's amazing how much, again, how many of us everybody in here except Rhonda is 50 or more. No, we got one there and one back there. Brad, how old are you, Brad? 48, ain't too far. Larry, 40, 44. But how much change have you seen, Larry, in the 44 years you've been here? A whole lot. And I realize that, you're not much younger than what I am. But and even in churches. All right. So he started out with 3 sons, and now 2 of them's dead. What would you think about Tamar? Two of your sons have married this woman, and now 2 of them's dead. What would you think about Tamar? What would you think if you was Tamar? Now, she knew how wicked the first one was. And I'll be honest with you, if he was that way, imagine how he treated her. The first one might have been a relief for her. The second one was a duty, all right, on both parts. And only she knows the truth of why God killed him. Now, I hope y'all can read between the lines of really what happened. I just leave it at this phrase. He pulled out. That's the best, without getting into it very far, she knew that. And to be there and to see that happen and watch him fall dead, probably on top of her. And she has to push him off. I believe this girl was scared to death. She's had 2 husbands and both of them had just, boom, fell over dead. I don't know, maybe the first one was in a drunken rage and all this fury, and all of a sudden, boom. Now, if medical examiner would say, well, he had a myocardial infarction, had a heart attack. That's a fancy word for having a heart attack. The only thing I can tell you is he didn't breathe no more. Right? Here comes the... Then said Judah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. And Tamar went and dwelt in his father's house. And in the process of time, the daughter of Shusha, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted, and went in unto his sheep shearers into Timoth, and to his friend Hira, and the Adulamite. And it was told Tamar, saying, behold, thy father-in-law goeth up unto Timoth to shear the sheep. And she put her widow's garments off her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself, and sat in the open place which is by the way of Timoth. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him to wife. So who's in the wrong here? Judah. Why wouldn't he have called her or sent for her and said, hey, this boy's grown now, won't you come on down and become his wife? He's thinking she's the black widow. I mean, the scripture plainly tells us, he's afraid this boy's going to die too. I don't know what she's doing, but she's killing my boys. Notice her obedience. In a land of pagans, could have went out and lived a worldly lifestyle, if you have it, running the bars, whatever the scene would be, found her another husband from somebody else, but she goes home and does exactly what she's supposed to do. There was garments that she was to wear that pointed to the fact that she was a widow. What these garments are, I don't have a clue. I don't know that the Bible ever says. Now, somebody maybe that has studied the customs of the land could probably elaborate on what that kind of attire would be. But notice it says she laid her widow garments aside. And she got all gussied up and covered her face and went down and sat on the street corner. I wonder how many propositions she had that day. You ever think about that?
She could have, but she had a plan.
She had a plan all the while. All right? Now, let's just keep reading. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, because she had covered her face. And he turned unto her by the way, and said, Go, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee, for he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What wilt thou give me, that thou mayest come in unto me? And he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she said, What wilt thou give me, a pledge, till thou send it? In other words, I ain't going to take your word. You're going to have to give me some collateral. When you give me the title to your Mustang, then I'll give it back when your check gets here. That could go either way here, you know. Katie's got a Mustang too, so don't everybody look at Gary. Do what? Yeah. And he said, What pledge? She said, and he said, What pledge shall I give thee? In other words, what do you want? And she said, Thy signet and thy bracelets and thy staff that is in thy hand. And he gave it to her that came in unto her, and she conceived by him. Notice, in other words, I want your identity, your signet. What is that signet? That's their signature. That's your stamp of approval. That's how you buy, you sell, your trade. Your bracelets. What were the bracelets there for? The bracelets proved that he had money. The staff was his, if you had it, it was his work truck. It was his toolbox. I mean, he's a shepherd. What do shepherds do? They drive sheep and they drive goats. And how do they do that? With their staff. Notice it doesn't say that she found out 2 months later she's pregnant. He went into her and she conceived. Doesn't take long, did it? So when did his life begin? When he went into her. Wish the world would get that into her head, right? And she arose and went away from him, and laid her veil from her, and put on the garments of her widowhood. Now, notice that during all of this, she never removed the veil. Had she removed that veil, she'd have been had. He would have recognized who she was. What do you think would have happened then? I don't think he would have ever went into her. Right? I mean, he has every right to marry another wife. His wife is dead. All right? I want everybody to understand that I've saw church-going Christians criticize other Christians because their spouse is dead and they want to marry somebody else or date somebody else, and then when people want to run their tongue, well, don't you love so-and-so? But their obligation, their fulfillment was fulfilled. They're no longer bound. Till death do you part. After death, you're free to marry. So, just want to throw that out there. So, don't be talking about Katie. She's got a boyfriend. I'm just teasing Katie. Nobody said anything, all right? And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find... I skipped one, didn't I? And he asked the men, and Judah sent the kid by the hand of his friend, the Edomite, to receive his pledge from the widow's hand, that woman's hand, but he found her not. And he asked the men of the place, saying, Where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside? And they said, There's no harlot in this place. And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her. And also the men of the place said that there's no harlot in this place. Now, notice who pays for this. Who's this kid belong to? It's not Judah's. It's his buddy. He said, hey, why don't you, can I have one of your kids? I need to pay for this woman down there. I mean, honestly, his friend might have been there when he made the deal. And anyhow, he goes And he sends this goat down there, this little bitty baby goat, if you'll have it, sends it down. She's gone. That's the men's. Ain't no woman here. We don't allow that around here. And Judah said, let her take it unto her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her. What's Judah saying here? Let her take it unto her, lest we be ashamed. Let her keep it for her wages. That's what he's saying. I did my part honestly. Shame's really on her now. It ain't my fault. She really wanted the kids. I sent the kid. I did what I said I'd do. So how are you going to... remember, his signet is gone. His bracelets, you can get more bracelets. You can get another staff. But the signet is gone. His credit card is gone. Think about it. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, bring her forth and let her be burnt. Now notice,
It wasn't his fault.
He's passed judgment upon this girl real fast. Well, if she's guilty, she'll die. Who does she think she is? She's supposed to be waiting for my baby boy, who's 6'4" by now. I'm just saying, he's a full-grown man. It's not her fault, it's his fault, right? I realize, again, it takes two to tango, but the blame, he doesn't accept it, he lays it, or he doesn't acknowledge his sin, but he points out hers. You ever seen anybody do that? Every day, Gary said. And when she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whose these are, am I with child? And she said, discern, I pray thee, whose are these? The signet, the bracelet, and the staff.
Well, that take the wind out of yourself.
Huh?
That take the wind out of yourself.
So all of a sudden, Tamar sent a message. She's there, she's down there, and she's ready to accept her punishment if you can tell her who these things belong to. Again, like Gary, boy, you're talking, swallowing your pride, eating crow, and then some. That's exactly right.
It won't go away.
Huh?
It won't go away.
Yeah, this is not going away anytime soon. And Judah acknowledged them and said, she hath been more righteous than I, because I gave her not to Shelah, my son, and he knew her again no more. She's still not married, though. But he didn't go in, he didn't take her to wife. Why? She's his daughter-in-law. So he, number one, he sinned by going into a harlot. She sinned by being the harlot. So now what's wrong? Did this cure things simply because he doesn't go her anymore? She's still a widow. And she's 3 months pregnant with her father-in-law's child. Man alive, you're talking about sowing wild oats. There's a whole field of them growing right here.
Well, what do you think Judah's responsibility should have been?
Honestly, he's not to go into her, but he's to provide for her and that child. So instead of, remember, there was no Social Security office that she could go down and sign up for widow's benefits. She had no livelihood. So you go back to your father's house, you allow your father to take care of you, and become his responsibility. When my baby boy gets big enough, he'll take care of you. It's not always about the conjugational part of it there, the raising up the seed. It's about the livelihood. Somebody's got to feed this girl. Somebody's got to put clothes on her back. You go down, you know what he should have done? He should have kept her there, let her wear her widow's garments until the son was big enough and taken care of her himself. But he sent her home. You know why? He wanted her out of his sight. He thought he was rid of her. Out of sight, out of mind. That's exactly right, Judy. The problem is solved. He don't have to worry about it. And then, maybe the youngest son goes off by himself and he picks himself out a wife, and all of a sudden, here comes Tamar. Hey, what about me? Well, he's already married now. I can't help you. He's already took a wife. But she saw what was going on. She knew she needed somebody to provide for her. It was not her dad's responsibility. She was gone, remember? She was married off. So as she's here, again, he has to take care of her and raise his child now. And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass that when she travailed, that one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, This came out first. And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that behold, his brother came out. And she said, How hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee. Therefore they called his name Perez. And afterward came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and they called his name Zerah. Notice the strife in these children, and even in the womb and in the birth canal. Does that sound familiar at all? Sounds exactly like Jacob and Esau. We know that Jacob turned out, because God changed him, turned out to be a pretty decent fella. What do you think is going to happen with these children? Now, again, I know some of you have read ahead and you've read the Bible. Does anybody really know? These boys are no good. Why are they no good? They was conceived in sin. Remember what I said a while ago? Here comes a whole field of wild oats. Right here in these two boys. All right, let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back for worship here in a little while.